Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Classroom to Corner Office Career Talks with Chris, a podcast intended to help all of those entering the workforce, in the workforce, and looking for some advice, or people that are looking to make a transition within their current careers. This is a podcast for you. Today, I'm joined by Jake Colega, who is a software engineer with Google. So, Jake, appreciate you taking time to chat with us today and maybe support some of what people understand about Google, the workplace culture, and some of that sensationalized in the movies. So, appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for the invite.
So, being a software engineer for Google, right? People are probably familiar with the term and understand what Google's into, but what does that actually translate to in your day-to-day work life?
In my day-to-day work, I'd say the biggest thing about being a software engineer at Google, as opposed to previous companies that I worked at, is the level of trust that you have here. There's a grueling interview process for a reason, and the result of that is once you're here, people just assume you can do your job, which is extremely beneficial, in my opinion, to have that faith from everybody around you and the ability to just come in, know what you have to do, get it done, and keep going.
Yeah, I know from our conversations that interview process is grueling. There are many
Yeah.
stages to that, and at least in those initial stages, there's not a lot of human contact as far as what they're
Mhm.
testing for. So, can you talk a little bit about what that process looks like? How many different testing skills, technical skill tests, and some of that human interaction that I remember, if I recall correctly, comes toward the end.
Yeah, right, definitely. So, yeah, I interviewed at Google twice. The first time was early 2020, right before the pandemic kind of shut everything down. I remember having to fill out a form saying I hadn't visited any foreign countries recently. So that was my first time through. And the biggest thing I learned when I did that interview was to just prepare for the situation, right? Like, it's not that going into it, I didn't think I had to prepare. It's that I was trying to know a bunch of specific things that I thought might come up in the interview, right? I was trying to memorize essentially. And, when I left that interview, I realized like everything I memorized didn't come up directly as I thought it would. But the things that did help me were the concepts that I could link between what I had studied and what came up in the interview. So yeah, so I didn't get the job that first time around, but the second time around I had a completely different idea for how I should go about preparing. And there's a whole bunch of resources out there for this kind of interview, these technical interviews that they usually focus on like individual questions, right? But the thing that I took away from it was how can I learn how to recognize what they're asking me and then apply it to like a general pattern that I've learned? Right? Because that's what helped me the most the second time around was being able to say, "Oh, I think I have an idea what you're asking me, so would it be okay if I do this?" And then, you get feedback from the interviewer and stuff like that.
With something
So
like
that
that, when you're recognizing the patterns, is there an example you can provide that's not like trade secret or Google secret
yeah.
as far as like the interview process?
Yeah, for sure. So at Google, I do interviews for Google as well. So I have a general idea of how things go on the back end now. But we do tend to ask a lot of graph related questions for software engineers. You know, Google's whole secret sauce in the beginning was building a great graph search algorithm to properly display web results to everybody. So graphing is kind of like in our DNA. So I remember a specific question during my second time around where I was asked to uh, do something related to recommending videos to a user, right? It was kind of like YouTube based, but that kind of idea. And I remember I said something to the interviewer. I was like, okay, this feels like a graph problem, and I think the depth first search algorithm would be useful here. And they responded, they were like, yeah, that's great. That's a good idea. You should go with that. When the first time around, if I had got that same question, I would have just been like, okay, I'm going to, build a list in this manner, right? Like I wouldn't have described the idea of what I was doing. I would have tried to do it. And especially being on the other side of these interviews now, figuring out how someone thinks by listening to the ideas they have or the way they're solving the problem or how they're going about thinking their way through the question you ask them is way more valuable to the interviewer to figure out how you actually work and match that for the kind of person they're looking for. Yeah.
No, awesome. Yeah, and that kind of puts into the both sides of that as somebody interviewing and now on the other side of that screen or table, right, depending on how this is being administered.
Yeah.
So you work through those technical interviews, demonstrate your skills. Now you get to the more of the human component, whether these are
Right.
behavioral questions or general questions. Can you talk a little bit more about how that then built to maybe a culture fit or a team fit? What did those discussions look like?
Yeah, definitely. So at Google, there's kind of two stages to that human part of the interview. You will have what is called a googliness and leadership interview, which is just the fancy term here for behavioral interview. And that'll be done by, a normal employee like me. I can do those. It's a coin flip whether or not I'm doing a technical interview or a behavioral interview when I carry one out. Uh, but in those, right, that's where you get those standard questions of like, tell me about a time that X, right? And we're just looking for you to provide a story. And the thing I'm always looking for when I'm carrying out that part of an interview is I don't care where your story comes from. In fact, I'd prefer if it didn't come from, like software engineering experience. If I ask you about a time that you were overloaded and you had to figure out how to prioritize your time and you talk about like, a sport you're doing and a project you're trying to do in your yard and your work and you're trying to balance all of that, that gives me an idea of how you're going to take experiences outside of your day-to-day work life and apply it to your day-to-day work life, right? It's showing that you have the ability to introspect at work based off of experiences wherever. Like I know you can learn from what your coworkers tell you in the moment, right? They might tell you like, oh, there's a better way to do this, whatever. But if you can also take like, I learned that it was very important to plan ahead how much I'm going to need to buy in terms of like, dirt to level my lawn or something, right? That's telling me that like you're taking that idea of planning ahead and you're internalizing it. And next time you have something at work where it's kind of like a future sight based task, you're going to be able to take that planning ahead skill that you've gained and apply it there. And then the second part of the behavioral, or I guess the more human part of the interview process here, is once you have completed your basic round of interviews, your packet goes to what is called the hiring committee. And, they're able to request extra interviews or whatever, but pretty much they will decide if you are capable of being hired at Google. If you get past hiring committee, your name essentially goes on a list where any manager who has an open position can then say they're interested in you. And that's where the team match comes into it. So if a manager is looking for somebody and they say, hey, I'm interested in this person, your recruiter will reach out to you, give you a description of the team. You say, yeah, I'm interested in learning more. And then you're going to have a meeting with that manager, right, to make sure you fit. And the thing that I would say you need to keep in mind when it comes to that part is do not make yourself fit what the manager is looking for. There's a reason they're asking the questions they're asking, and there's a reason they are looking for a specific person, and that is to suit them, of course, but also to make sure they're providing what you need. So if you go into the interview and they're like, I'll use a software engineering example, and they're like, yeah, we're looking for a UI developer, and you hate UI, right? But you're going to say, oh yeah, sure, I can do that because you want to please them, right? And then if they're the manager who offers you a position, you go in and you're going to spend your first however many months or years being dissatisfied with the work you're doing. You're going to slow down your personal growth at that point, and you're going to do a disservice to the team you joined. When it comes to that kind of that fit analysis that you're doing, with any position, make sure you are not fooling yourself or making yourself fit into a box that you actually don't fit into, right? Because it's not just detrimental to the company; it's detrimental to you and your progress.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good takeaways from that. Whether you're in or going into a field where those technical interviews are paramount to getting to the next steps, or whether you're in a career field that relies on those behavioral interviews to learn more about you as a person, right, and how you apply concepts to conversations, whether that's technical skills being exhibited, or whether it's just part of a basic conversation about team fit or company fit, right? Be yourself. Being
Right.
honest to yourself about yourself and with those people is going to ensure that not only do you end up in on a department, a team that best suits you, but also, like you said, for your personal and professional growth and development. If you're unhappy at work and it's not an experience that you really have interest, you're only hurting everybody. And more importantly, if you are making the choice of whether or not you want to work for a company yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, the honesty aspect of it applies to the whole interview, right? Do not mask anything, right? There's no point. You're like we were just discussing, you're doing a disservice to yourself just as much as the company. There's when I'm doing the behavioral interviews here, I specifically have two questions that I like to ask about. Tell me a time where you received negative feedback, and tell me about a time where you had a project fail. And if the candidate I'm interviewing tells me I've never received negative feedback or I've never had a project fail, something along the lines of my biggest flaw is that I try too hard, I'm immediately skeptical of them, right? Like everybody's had a project. Everybody's been told like, "Oh, you didn't do this right. You could have done this better." Just be honest about it. Tell me what it was and how you took that situation and used it to make yourself better, because that's all we're looking for. Somebody who's going to take every opportunity that they can to continue to grow, continue to learn, because that's going to be the best for the company, flat out, right? Like if you're thinking about it from a selfish point of view, but it's also the best for the employee.
Yeah, 100%. So we go through this process, the second time, right? That's part of that
Mhm.
failure that definitely could have been part of, any conversation you had that second time
Yeah.
around. Um, and we're software engineer at Google, and I would assume for many that have maybe the degree you have, or maybe some of those experience. This is kind of maybe a mountaintop type of experience.
Mhm.
So, coming out of college, right? How did we get from whether it was the inspiration for the type of degree you were pursuing, was the goal all along to whether it's to work at Google or to be a software engineer at a larger company or corporation? And you kind of talk through a little bit the steps along the way that got you there, whether those were key job experiences, certifications, skill building, or whether it was really the decision about this is the type of academic program that I think is going to allow me entry into the field itself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I'll start at the beginning of my college career, right? So I'll give a brief mention before that. I didn't have much experience programming, right? Like I was the family computer fixer, but I didn't know what I was doing when it came to coding or anything like that. And so I went to college, and during orientation they were like, "Okay, pick what major you intend to go into." And I remember I selected aerospace engineering because I went to the engineering section of the majors, and aerospace was first on the list because it started with A. So that's the one I picked. That's what it was. I went into college. I was like, I guess this is what I'm gonna do. I don't know. I kind of want to be an engineer. That sounds cool. And like I said, that was the first one on the list. But the thing that ended up being a big influence on where I am now is I went to Penn State for my undergrad, and there you are required to take a first year seminar, which I'm assuming there's an analog to that at every school. But your first year seminar does not have to be in your major. So I was reading through the descriptions of the various more technical first year seminars, all the different engineering ones, mechanical engineering, that type of stuff. And I came across the computer science one, and it said something about like, if you take a first year seminar, does not have to be in your major. So I was reading through the descriptions of the various more technical first year seminars, all the different engineering ones, mechanical engineering, that type of stuff. And I came across the computer science one, and it if you like to solve logic puzzles, this would be a great class for you. And I was like, yeah, I like puzzles. I'll take that. So I took that first year seminar. And in that class, I realized like, oh, I actually really like this process of taking a problem and coming up with like a repeatable logical solution and taking that. And as the year progressed, we did start to code a little bit, taking that and putting it into code, and learning how the languages work. And the idea of uh, the first idea that I came up with to solve a problem, I could then go Google search it and be like, how to sort a list faster, or whatever, the basic stuff is, and read a Stack Overflow article about it. And that just kind of, like tickled my brain in the right way. And I decided to switch majors at that point to computer engineering, because I still had that itch to be an engineer. So I was like, this seems like the right fit. So yeah, I went through the first 3 years of that before I got an internship. So I had an internship between my junior and my senior year. And actually, I specifically remember at the career fair where I ended up talking to the company I did my internship with, there was a line for Google and it was out the door. And I was like, no, I will not, I'm not even going to stand in this line to talk to them. So I had specifically given Google the cold shoulder at that point, but it wasn't for any reason other than I would rather talk to 10 other companies than wait in the line for Google. But anyways, I got to the internship and it was completely different than school, right? In school, you have these like theoretical ideas of like, oh, the traveling salesman problem. What's the fastest way to get to all the cities? If it takes 5 minutes to get to city A and 10 to B, but if you go from A to C, it takes 14 or whatever, all that type of problem solving. And then you get to work, right? I got to my internship and they were like, we need a website to display this information. And I was like, well, that's nothing like what I learned. Uh, but I enjoyed it too, right? Like I enjoyed solving a real problem there. Like it was an actual problem that when I went to my meetings and showed everybody the progress I had made, there were people who worked at the company who were like, oh, this is great. It's going to help us. And I found that to be like something that I really enjoyed about software development, was producing these pieces of software, or the various services, or whatever, however you want to define them, that solved an actual problem for somebody, especially when you were directly interacting with them. So I kind of took that back for my senior year, and I was like, all right, how do I marry education, the educational environment of learning these individual algorithms and whatnot, to the real world that I just experienced of somebody says, I need this, and you need to go do it for them. And to be honest, I struggled with it pretty consistently throughout most of my senior year. I got pretty jaded with the school experience of like, this isn't going to help me. Like what I'm sitting here listening to the professor talk about is not going to help me solve someone's problem better. But by the end of it, I kind of realized like, okay, what I'm doing here is learning a bunch of building blocks. And my job is going to be to take those various building blocks and turn them into, what the person's asking for. So I came away from college being like, all right, I learned some building blocks, right? Like I know it's not going to directly help me. I'm never going to be like, oh, I remember from, comp sci 311, this one thing that's going to help me specifically do this. But the connections that I made between concepts and the ideas that were given to me were the foundation that I was going to use to then solve problems, at least. So
Yeah. And that I think
um,
that's an important takeaway that obviously served you well through those interview processes, right? Connecting concepts to real world problems and
exactly.
understanding this is what I need to draw upon in order to fix this problem. And now I need to recall what building blocks are necessary to incorporate into this solution. Also throughout your college journey, right? We've got early on, right? That first semester of your freshman year, it was exploration. right? I'm not
Mhm.
just going to pick something that aligns directly with this major that I chose, right? I found something that was interesting, unique, and that informed your education path, which then helped
Mhm.
inform your career path and led to an experiential learning opportunity through an internship, where you then were placed in an environment where you were really not only learning how to apply those skills and those tools, but you also receiving feedback. Right. This is,
Yeah,
hey, this is
definitely.
exactly what we're looking for. Keep building on this. You're doing, a good job. All of that kind of put you in a position. Unfortunately, you were jaded a little bit with the education system at the time, but kind of refocused and replaced that attention in a way of, okay, what can I take away from this that will be helpful moving forward? So,
Right.
we're walking across that stage. We're graduating. What comes next, right?
Right.
Internship. Now we're looking for full time employment and really to put this to use every day.
Exactly, yeah. Um, and it takes a certain level of distance, in my opinion, from events like that to really learn about them or to think back and realize exactly what you were doing. But there is an incredible correlation between that takeaway I had towards the end of my undergrad degree and the takeaway I had from my first interview at Google of like, what matters here is the ability to learn building blocks and then do something productive with them. The interviews at Google, they want to see me do something productive. They don't want to see me like know a certain building block inside and out, and then when they ask me about something else, I have no clue. So being able to kind of like see patterns like that and introspect on it is very helpful as you progress through your career.
Yeah, great. So we get to this first job, right?
Mhm.
What are we doing, right? We're obviously probably building on that information and applying it in new ways. But what types of problems were you solving at that point, or what was like the takeaways that you had from that first job experience, and then how did that progress on through to get you where you are?
Yeah, for sure. So my first job, um, I was a software developer, but it wasn't at a tech company. It was more like the software arm of the company was responsible for supporting the main business. And the thing that eventually drove me to try to get into a tech company was that disconnect where it felt like as a software engineer, I have this idea for making this like grand system that's going to solve the problems that we're aware of as the software engineer, the people who are deploying the code and seeing the errors and whatnot. But the business side says we just need this new feature so that we can launch this new project. That disconnect was eventually what drove me to a tech company. But while I was there, the what I learned a lot was there's a lot of value to having that larger vision of what you're doing. And while I had these grand ideas of like how we could solve this problem, and I wasn't always able to get them done or whatever the case was, being able to see the bigger picture and talk about it, that would even help, whatever smaller thing you are working on as well. Um, there was one specific project that I worked on that started off as a side project. We were working on this system and it had this new kind of data in it, and I wanted to create a user interface to expose this data so that other product leads and whatnot would be able to see what we had essentially. So I was doing that on the side. It wasn't even an official task. And once I had like the first version of it working, I did exactly what I said. I started giving it to some of the product leads, some of the people who interface between the software developers and the business. And I was like, "What do you think? Like, this is what we have, and this is how you can use it. And we'll be able to, if you see something in here that you need for your project, we'll be able to like connect in this way and whatnot." And I specifically remember my product owner at the time was like, "This is great. Like this is perfect for me to then go to other product owners and say that we can help you in this way, and this is what our team is working on and everything like that." And it kind of got me the backing to then say, well, we could actually make our system better in these 10 ways. And I could, at that point, show how it was, right? Because the user interface was a lot more friendly than me, you know, copying and pasting a complex data object and being like, yeah, this is it, right? So I learned that there's a benefit to believing in your understanding of a situation to the point where you can support what you're thinking. You can take your understanding and successfully explain it to someone else and back up what you're saying and use that to push not only like where you want the product to go, but where you want your career to go at that point, right? Like you if you're now the guy who's coming up with ideas, that's pretty useful for if you're seeking out a promotion, right? So that was one of my big takeaways at my first job was just like you have these opportunities and you can take them or you can just keep doing the minimum that gets you your paycheck. Neither of those is a problem. But if you want to actually influence something and affect your career in a positive way, you can take whatever's in front of you uh, and do that.
Yeah, and identify, an opportunity or a need, or at least like you said, information that would be helpful for people on the business side, to impact the bottom line, right? And really, at
Yeah,
any company, in the end, like people want to see how is this going to impact the bottom line, right? It may do so in a short period of time, 3 to 6 months, or it may be something that's demonstrated over years. But in the end, it's okay. How is this going to be useful for us? So, within that first
right.
experience, you have that takeaway, and you also have kind of like the realization of, I really want to be more on the tech side where, we're developing for the sake of developing, right?
Mhm.
And, we kind of don't know what we don't know until we get into it. So, moving through that transition and, finding your way into a tech company and ultimately Google, I know from our conversations as well that throughout that time, you were also building not only the skills, but the certifications. You were exploring additional
Mhm.
education. So, that was also part of, once you kind of set that goal, working towards it. Can you talk a little bit about what types of additional skills, certifications, and education you sought out to make yourself an attractive applicant to a tech company and ultimately for Google?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think the biggest thing was I was trying to acquire as many skills and certifications and education as I could in a way that I didn't have to, the company supported it, is how I should say it. Every time we were adopting a new technology or considering adopting a new technology, even at my first position, I'd be like, well, there's a conference for this. Let's go. So I'd go, or try to go. It didn't always work out. And when I was there, it was great. Now this is a learning opportunity for how the industry works as a whole. I went to multiple conferences in that position, and I learned a lot about. I think that's probably where a good part of my idea that I want to work at a tech company came from, was listening to people, even people from Google who were giving presentations at these conferences and thinking like, oh, they're developing for the sake of developing out here trying to like make sure we've got the right database so that we don't have to manage it in the future because the business is never going to be satisfied with us saying we need to take a couple months to migrate databases, right? That was the kind of stuff we were looking for. And the people giving the presentations were all about, yeah, this, we found a way to up the performance for this kind of search, and we found a way to reduce storage size by using a certain algorithm, whatever. They were talking about the cool stuff. So that was one part of it. But there was also something I learned, uh, not right when I started, but not far I started, was that, my company would pay for a certain amount of education per year. And I was like, okay, then I will get that amount of education per year. It took me, I ended up taking technically 2 semesters off, summer and fall, in between my undergrad and starting a master's program. But pretty much what I did was, okay, how much are they going to cover per year? I'm going to go find a master's of computer science program that fits within that budget, and I'm going to do it. 2 years after well, 2.5 years after I started at my first company, I had a master's degree that the company had paid for, right? It was I learned of this opportunity and I took it, essentially. And then having that master's was the thing that I could put on my resume, and get past the filters at Google. So being able to just take advantage of whatever opportunities there are, right? And I know a lot of companies have like stipulations of if we pay for education, you have to work for us for X years after that, whatever. The company I was working for didn't have that, so that was nice. But still, there's opportunities to utilize your position to further your career, right? And you have to find those for yourself because the company's not going to tell you about it. They're not going to suggest you go to a conference, but if you can justify it, go for it, right? Like
Yeah.
take what's there.
It's paving your own way. You identified
Mhm.
not only at the time what was helpful for maybe the projects you were working on or, a new initiative, but also, hey, this will be helpful for me too, right? And that's
Mhm.
you were inspired by, people at Google or other tech companies, and you're like, these are people that are doing the work that I'm most interested in. And it kind of like
Right.
sets that bar of, oh, if I really want to do what in my mind is most beneficial for me using my skills, like this is what I need to aspire towards. So, kind of set a new benchmark for you professionally. So then you work in and transitioning into tech, which obviously has been, a good fit for you with your
Mhm.
skills, your experience, and now professionally, right? Continuing to grow, continue to develop. So I'll ask now, we're thinking about Google, right? It's sensationalized in movies and TV
Yeah.
shows. How real is that, right? And what's real with this, and then what's more of just like people are taking a little liberty on this.
You know, probably more of it is real than you think. Honestly, uh, the the lunches, they're free. There's a gym. There's a room with a ping pong table and a pool table and pinball machines and a TV with every game system you can think of hooked up to it. Um, there's the the pay, right? Obviously, the benefits, all of it is there. And one thing that I say to people that I'm interviewing, right? Like at the end of interviews, I always give them a chance to ask me questions. And as you would expect, the most common question is, "What's your favorite thing about working at Google?" And I always answer that by saying there's two things. There's the first one, and it's the leading favorite thing by far, is the people I work with. Everybody here is competent. They do what they're gonna say they do what they say they're going to do, and they're ready and willing to help. And the second thing is Google is smartly selfish, right? Like Google wants you to be as productive as possible. So they're going to figure out how to make you that productive. And it is through motivating you with your salary and your compensation and benefit. It's through making you want to be at work, right? Like I do enjoy coming in so that I can get my free lunch and play a game of pool after lunch with my friend. And it's through making sure you are doing something that you think is cool, right? Like I've switched positions twice at Google now, so I've been in 3 different roles, and each time it was incredibly supported by my manager. They were like, "Yeah, if you wanna try something else, go do it. You're gonna be happier, you're gonna be more motivated, and you're gonna be more productive," right? Like, in the end, all of these decisions are being made to get the most out of the employees, right? Like, it is extremely selfish of Google, but you can at least take advantage of that, right? Like, if they're gonna want you to be super productive, then eat their food, right? Like
Yeah.
it's it's worth it.
And that's that empowerment, right? Not just empowerment to, like you said, be smartly selfish, but you're empowered to take the lead on that conversation. And you,
Yeah.
you feel the ability to be like, hey, I really like what they're doing over here. I really like these types of projects. I think that I would be an asset to this team and to this group. Can I explore this? And they give you the freedom to explore it. And like you said, the managers were all on board. Hey, if this is something you think you want to get into, cool. Let's see if we can make it happen. Right. Or
Yep.
it may not happen right away. And, we understand that that's the goal you're working towards. But for now, let's just keep doing what we keep doing the cool stuff that we do over here, and we'll find a way to get you over there.
Yeah, exactly. If you are interested in what you're doing, you're going to be happier doing it, and that's good for everybody. Your career development is also good for Google's bottom line.
Yeah, the bottom line and the investment in the human resources and the human capital, and not just right the bottom line as far as the financial investment in the projects and the people. Right,
Mhm.
we're developing people that are going to be multifaceted. They're going to have skills that span across all of these different project areas, so that there may come a time when instead of you exploring it, somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, we've seen what you've done in all of these different teams. We want you to come over here. This is a new and unique experience that we're not sure what it's gonna lead to, but we think you'll be a good fit."
Yep, exactly. And the only way that that works for everybody involved is for everybody involved to understand that, right? Like to know that that's the ultimate goal and to work towards it. A lot of companies seem to ignore the classic phrase of penny wise and pound foolish, right? Where they're going to save a penny here by not promoting their employee or by not giving them the most powerful laptop. I specifically remember that was a problem at my first job. We were constantly complaining as developers that we didn't have powerful enough laptops. We were wasting time not being able to run two processes at once. But the company was like, we don't want to pay for a better laptop. And I was like, you don't want to spend $500 to make me, nearly 50% more productive? I don't understand. So yeah, the idea to just see the big picture and work towards it with your employees, I think is incredibly smart. And I think that's the thing that from my experience, Google does best.
Yeah, and that's great. So, kinda get towards an end here and maybe
Sure.
recalling what that college experience was as you were, looking, whether it was for the internships or getting out into industry, into the field to put to use those skills and that education that you had acquired. What is one, and if you have a couple things, feel free to share, one thing that you know now, right, through the
Mhm.
experience you've had that you wish you would have known or at least had some insight into, in those waning years in your college education, or maybe just as you were entering the workforce as well?
Yeah. Um, I think one of the biggest things for sure is something that we've pretty much been talking about the whole time of target what you want to do, especially when I went to career fairs and stuff in college, whether it was for internship or full-time work. My mindset was find something. It wasn't find something that I want to do. It was find something. And yes, I fully understand that I'm now saying that as somebody who is comfortable, right? And in the moment, I don't not remember being like, well, I have to get a job, right? Like, but the the extra time it would have taken to maybe do a little bit more research on what I was going to do or ask a couple more questions in interviews about how the interviewer likes working at the company, right? Normally you're interviewed by people who are roughly your peers and using that information to, even if I had made the same decisions of where I went, I would at least have more information on the outside world or the the industry as a whole, right? Like just getting that information and then using it for your personal progress would have been extremely beneficial to me. Like I said, my mindset was find something. And I think the other thing I would tell myself was this, something along the lines of you can get into Google, right? Like my mom will tell you that there was a point where she asked me, she was like, "Did you know Google has an office downtown?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Is that somewhere you'd like to work?" And I specifically said I could never get in at a company like that. I'm not good enough, right? Like there's you can get where you want to go if you figure out how to be the person they're looking for. Uh, that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I got after my first failed attempt at getting in was it doesn't mean you're not good at what you do. It means you didn't match the criteria they were looking for. So figure out how to match that criteria if you think that's where you want to be and trust that you can. Trust that you can adapt and grow and get where you want to go, and don't limit yourself as I certainly did in the beginning.
Yeah, two good takeaways. One looking at when you're entering the workforce, align those interests with roles and opportunities that will allow you to not only apply those skills, but also as you're in the workforce, right? Aspire to, the best company that offers opportunities for the experiences that you have or are gaining. Don't limit yourself, create those aspirational goals and move towards them, but with intent, right? Understanding these are the
Mhm.
criteria that they're looking for, whether that's education, whether those are certifications, or whether that's just more experience. Find the
Mhm.
ways to seek out those opportunities and actually be something that you can list on a resume and an application. So you get through those first scans of the interview. Okay, well, this isn't going to exclude me. At least I'm in like the final 10%. And then from there,
Yep.
that is going to be on me to demonstrate why I am a good fit and why I am the right person for this role. Good. So,
Exactly. You
yeah.
you can get where you want to go. Just figure out how to get there, and work towards it.
Indeed. So along the way, I'm sure you've had some people, whether those are specific roles or whether those are family or friends that have been great mentors or provided great advice to you along the way. I've been recently kind of giving people the floor to be like, hey, let's highlight some people that were really helpful in your career journey. So whether that's a specific person by name or whether that's a group of people along the way, is there anybody you'd like to shout out as great mentors in your journey?
But yeah, there's the manager who I had during my internship and when I first started at the company, right? Because my first job was at the company that I interned. His name was Tony Luke, and the the understanding that he had for somebody coming out of college was invaluable for my progress. He never was like, "Well, why aren't you, producing fast enough?" or whatever that is. He understood, like, you're adapting to a new world, you're adapting to, just a new working system, right? You're going from being responsible for studying and taking your exams to you have to go to meetings and explain what's going on and work with other people, and you have to even the basics of tracking your work, right? Like, all of that was new. And without that level of understanding and support and encouragement, especially during my internship, I don't think I would have been able to take away the stuff that I did. It would have been a much more anxiety inducing experience of like, how am I going to fit into this world? But having that understanding of like, it takes time, you'll get there, was incredibly valuable to me. And also, there was one employee who I worked with at my first job, and then I followed in their footsteps. They got into Google about 2 years before I did. Bhavin Bhattacharya. He was incredibly valuable as a mentor in my first position, but also as somebody to just talk to when it came to taking that next step into a tech company, right? Because I mean, for what it's worth, I also interviewed at, I don't know, 50 other companies in between my first position and starting at Google. So just being somebody who went through it and then not being the person who pulls the ladder up, right? They were like, okay, let me help you now. I've learned something, time for me to teach you. I try to keep that in mind anytime anybody asks me any questions. Sharing that knowledge is incredibly beneficial to the person, because I don't know where I would have ended up if he didn't do a couple mock interviews with me in the first place. So yeah, definitely both of them.
Awesome. Always great to hear those people that have helped you along the way. And, I'm assuming you'll be that person to other colleagues and those younger people, well, not even younger, but just new entrants to the workforce and that's kind of the career path that you're in now. So, Jake, appreciate it. Appreciate you taking time to share some of your insight and your experiences. And whether this is confirming or affirming in different ways that what we see in the movies really does happen at Google.
Yeah, definitely. Just use it as aspirational targets, and don't be afraid to ask whatever company you work for if they can match it.
There we go.
But yeah, no, thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk, and like we were just discussing, I hope this is me being able to return the favor that others gave me, at least in a small way. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Great. And everybody out there listening, make sure that you tune into the next episode of Classroom to Corner Office Career Talks with Chris.